Garlic's a kitchen staple, but cleaning that garlic crusher is the worst. So I'm making a ceramic grater that's super easy to clean, doubles as a container, and might just change the way you prep garlic. Let's dive right in. I'm using 450 grams of clay for the dish and 300 for the grater. I'm going to start with the dish. So I centered the 450 grams. I'm using my favourite yellow speckled clay. Once I've centered the clay, I flatten the clay. And then I push down and open out. I'm opening out for a flat base. And I start to form the walls. I don't need a lot of clay for the walls. It's quite a shallow dish, about 6 centimeters high. I compress the base. And now I pull up the walls. I trim to create a rounded foot. And then I smooth the sides. I wire through. And I set aside to leather hard. Now for the grater. The grater is a very shallow dish that sits on the rim of the container. So I center the 300 grams of clay. I flatten the clay. Now I want to flatten the clay to about the inner dimension of the dish. So I measure. So I push down just a little and open out. I'm just bringing out enough clay to create an overhanging rim. That's going to sit over the rim of the dish. And now I compress. Compressing the clay really helps prevent cracking. I measure to make sure it'll fit over the rim of the other dish. And then I set aside to dry, but not quite to leather hard. So I'll dry this a little slower. Now, time to trim the dish. I flip the dish and center. And once centered, I fasten to the bat. The trimming's pretty simple. I'm just going to trim across the base. And then I smooth the base with my flexible rib. And I can move on to the grater. So I upend the grater and center. I've dampened my bat a little so the grater should stay in place while I trim. If this doesn't work, use some clay to fasten. So I'm just trimming across the base. And then I compress with a rib. And I flip the lid. It's time to add the grater. Now I've dried my lid a little slower. And I'll explain why in a moment. I center the lid and I mark out a couple of concentric circles. Now I'm using the back of my pin tool and I'm just gouging into the clay, radiating from the center into the clay. I'm making sure that there are burrs formed on the edges. You can play around with the pattern here. It doesn't have to be radial. The most important thing is that as your piece dries, you're left with these sharp edges, and that's why we don't want the clay too dry. Now I make a cutout with a hole cutter on the edge of the grater. This is so I can push the garlic into the container below as I grate. I give this a quick tidy up with a sponge and set aside to dry. I've made an extra lid that acts as a cover for the container. Once the pieces are dry, I bisque fire. And I'm ready to glaze. I start by glazing the grater. Keeping in mind, I don't want to get the glaze on too thick. A thick coating of glaze could make the grating action ineffective. If you don't have control over this and the glaze you're using is a bit thick, you could dampen your piece by spraying. This makes the bisque less porous so it absorbs less glaze. Once I've glazed all the pieces, I make sure I clean up the bases. I have 2 sets and I'm glazing them in 2 different ways. One all in my oyster white glaze and the second one in a matte satin glaze. My white glaze is a really functional glaze at this temperature and looks great on this speckled clay. And now I fire. I'm firing to cone 6. This is considered a mid-fire. So I've been looking forward to see how this grater works. I just peel back the garlic skin and grate. It's really quite sharp and is very effective in grating the garlic. I think it'd probably work well for ginger as well. Once I finish grating the garlic, I can push it down into the container underneath. I scrape off any leftovers and then I'm going to add some butter. This really isn't product placement, but that's my last video, how to make a butter bell. And so this is the second version with a matte satin glaze. And that grater is super easy to clean. For more practical functional kitchenware, why not check out my butter bell video? And thanks for watching.